The only reason why we are able to be throttled and censored on social media is that the big tech companies own our data.
Today's guest is someone who helps shape how we access information online, but also isn't afraid to call out the dangerous bias behind big tech. I'm talking about Larry Sanger, the co-founder of Wikipedia. He's now leading the charge for truth in the digital age, and trust me, this conversation is going to challenge how you think about knowledge, freedom, and censorship. Larry, welcome to the podcast. It's good to have you on.
It's good to be here.
There's so many things I want to get in today. I want to talk about censorship. I want to talk about free speech. I want to talk about your conversion story. I want to talk about really the birth of Wikipedia as much as we can get in, probably more than we even have time for here. But your story has, I think viral's a fair way to describe. Not everybody's conversion story goes viral. But you've been very, were you surprised by that?
I was shocked. I had no clue whatsoever that it was going to happen. I even told friends in advance that it was going to, be completely ignored. It's too long. It's too geeky. So,
when you put this out, you had already been a believer for a time. You waited to kind of share that you had a Christ encounter. How long was that, and what was kind of the purpose in waiting to share that?
5 years.
Wow.
And well, the reason is I wanted to be prepared because I knew that I might come in for attacks, especially if I were not prepared.
Mm-hmm. Meaning like theologically prepared and philosophically that you had answers to those responses.
Yes, I needed to have a lot of theology, some more philosophy of religion under my belt. And I have done a lot of that work. I've read a lot of books. And I've written a fair bit. So, yeah.
And your background, you were philosophy and religious studies degrees, right?
Only philosophy.
Yeah.
I did teach philosophy of religion a couple of times, but that wasn't even my specialization. So
I have a mentor that he always used to tell people, when you get saved, wait a year before you tell anybody. And I think that, you took that seriously. But I understand. I think that, it's very noble that you were wanting to be able to defend your faith, against any accusations. We see, various public figures, which I think you as a co-founder of Wikipedia count as that, and that have come out very quickly with their faith, and we see them fizzle out 3 months or 6 months down the road, or, and I think that, having the time involved to work out your salvation and work out that Christian philosophy and your response, probably put you in a much more successful space in doing that. You've been able to share your story on quite a few podcasts and shows, getting a lot of phones ringing quite a bit right now.
More than I have had time for, actually, but yeah.
What's, for you, I know that you had some exposure to Christianity growing up, and it sounds like your dad had kind of a faith journey that he was on himself, kind of navigating through some different things.
Sure.
And there was one thing that stood out to me is you had a conversation with a pastor that sort of solidified maybe unbelief or at least some spiritual frustration. Can you talk to me about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have to give a little bit of background first. I had a class in philosophy, and I had really started exploring the basic questions of philosophy. And I thought that it was extremely important to know the truth. It's like I was a truth seeker with a capital T, but I thought that it was important also to basically suspend judgment about everything and believe only what I knew on perfectly rational grounds to be true. So my former belief in God went out with that. But one of the three big questions that I focused on when I was 17 or so was arguments for the existence of God, so I thought, well, what better person to talk to than a pastor?
You would think, right?
You would think.
So this sent you on a deeper study of philosophy. You eventually went to Reed University. And you had a slogan. What was the unofficial slogan for Reed University?
Atheism, communism, free love, I think.
Yes, I got a kick out of that when I saw that. And now, when you were there, it was not probably known as maybe as woke as the university probably would be known as today. Is that fair?
Yeah, Reed College. It definitely became more woke, I think, as the old guard, old-fashioned free speech liberals sort of went out, and the new wokesters came in between 2010 and 2015 or so. And yeah, they have been one of the centers of the woke debate, in the last 10 years, actually.
And I'm sure being at a university like that and, studying philosophy at a high level like that, this only probably emboldened your, agnostic position. Is that fair?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was. I actually did have a friend who was a Christian, and at least for a while, we became estranged later. So it was not unknown, but yeah, it was very easy to be a non-believer. That was sort of the default position for a lot of people, or they had some sort of, vague, squishy, maybe new age spiritual approach.
What was the thing that really began to change your mind about what you believed about God?
I mean, there were a lot of little things, to be honest. I think of it as a wall between me and God, and bricks were taken away one by one. I can talk about maybe one that was important. So in the 10 years since I became a philosopher, started thinking of myself as one, the 10 years after that, I was really into Ayn Rand. And she was an atheist, and she is perhaps most famous for her ethical egoism, right? The idea that what we ought to do is determined by what is in our own enlightened self-interest, ultimately. Well, it happens that when I got married, and then even more after I had my first child, that I reflected that I would die for these people. And as a philosopher, I had been very interested in foundational questions about ethics. And so I had given quite a bit of thought to ethical egoism. I thought that I was able to defend it reasonably well. But here, I couldn't actually characterize my own motivation as being something, as being in my self-interest. It's not in my self-interest. It's in their interest if I die for them, right? So that basically caused me to think that, well, maybe Ayn Rand was not all she was cracked up to be. I'm not saying I was a blind follower of her. I wasn't at all.
Sure.
But the point is that if she was wrong about egoism, then perhaps she is wrong about the atheism part as well.
Let's talk a little bit about where you are today. So you have a strong background in big tech. You co-founder of Wikipedia. You're well aware of kind of the machine. When you look at the church today or Christians today, is it fair to say that there's been some censorship, or there's been some sort of shadow banning at all on the internet? Do you think that that's a fair assessment?
Oh, there certainly has been. I can't necessarily speak to the experience of the church, and I think that must be the case, but I don't. That isn't an issue that I've been following very closely. But there's been a lot of shadow banning of politics general. I think everybody knows that by now. It's happened to me, actually. It's interesting. I guess just a couple of months ago, I had a tweet that went viral for the first time in 4 years, I guess, There was a time when I had definitely been essentially shadow banned or highly throttled. It was rare for any of my tweets to get more than like 10 likes
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
10 retweets, whatever. But this one had like thousands, like over 5,000 retweets and over 10,000 likes. And Elon Musk responded to it. Um, and at the same time, ever after that, I've been no longer shadow banned. So it's interesting. There's a lot going on behind the scenes. Mine is only one example, obviously. The Twitter files really
Yeah.
blew the lid on that stuff, and that we really need to be talking about that stuff more.
What if America isn't falling apart because of aggressive secularists, but because too many Christian leaders have more in common with secular elites than with the Bible? That's the bold claim at the heart of a new book you need to know about, Stockholm Syndrome: Christianity by John G. West. Eric Metaxas calls it a book that will infuriate precisely the right people and says every thinking Christian should read it. This book pulls no punches. It exposes how influential Christian voices are compromising on everything from biblical authority and science to sex, race, and religious liberty. But it doesn't stop there. It also gives you practical steps to stand for truth in your family, your church, and your community. Visit StockholmSyndromeChristianity.com to learn more and join the resistance. That's StockholmSyndromeChristianity.com.
Everybody's used Wikipedia at some point. It's something that I think if you've ever searched a key figure or personality, you've certainly ended up there. But this started someplace. So take us to the beginning. What was really the birth of this like?
Sure. So Jimmy Wales and I had known each other since the mid-90s online, mostly, and he registered newpedia.com back in 1999, and to make a long story short, he hired me to start it basically in 2000. But that project had a very arduous editorial process, so we decided to find new ways for the general public to contribute. And a friend of mine told me January 2nd, 2001, about wikis. And wikis, he explained, are these websites where anybody can edit any page. And it just so happens that, wonderful things result, and the vandals are turned off because it's a lot easier to revert their work or their vandalism than it is to actually do the vandalism. And so I said, oh, we ought to use this for the encyclopedia project. And so again, to make a long story short, it was launched as Wikipedia.com. It was going to be for profit. And 2 weeks later, because the software was already written, the basic, anyway, software was written. And in that first year, it just took off exponentially. It was amazing. I had never been part of such a thing, but it was my job to manage the project, to basically get it started.
Now, had you already, because you were you were a professor at one point, were you still teaching at that time, or had you already stepped out of that?
Yeah, so I was a GTA throughout the 90s, and then after I got my PhD and after working on Wikipedia, I taught at Ohio State again and a few other area colleges for a few years until Wikipedia became really famous, and then people started offering me interesting jobs.
Yeah. At what point did you step out of Wikipedia?
Basically, I worked on the project for 2 years altogether, a little over 2 years. And then basically they lost the ability to pay me because the .com boom had turned to bust and Wikipedia had not started making them money or anything like that. But then I permanently distanced myself from the project around 2004, 2005 actually started criticizing it because I by that time had decided there's no way I'm ever going to go back. It's just dysfunctional. So I could easily see that at that point.
With having, this space in technology and I think fair to say big tech, I want to talk a little bit more about these issues of freedom, censorship, cancel culture. You've had a front row seat, arguably, to a lot of this. Are we at a place to where this is improving? Should we be optimistic? Is there still cause for concern? Where are we at right now?
I would say there's a lot of cause for concern. I think the fact that Trump was elected and that Elon Musk took over X are positive signs, perhaps, in this direction. But even under Musk, there are still people who are being silenced who shouldn't be. There's still a lot of strong forces in the world that are trying to control the message that gets out there, and we need to do all we can to fight for freedom of speech.
So what does that look like? What would be, the average person out here watching? What's your recommendation on, how can they get involved in that fight and kind of be part of a positive solution on the other side of this?
I mean, this is going to be disappointing to a lot of people because it's a lot of work, but frankly, I actually think a lot of people need to use Linux a lot more than now do. Windows and Mac are not actually that much easier to use. In fact, in a lot of ways, they're no easier to use at all than Linux. Linux has become a lot easier. The other thing is, I think that people should, for their email, they should register their own domain names. If their email is hosted somewhere, at least they need to own their own
even if
email
they're not like
address.
a quote-unquote public figure. You think everybody should do this?
Everyone should be doing this. It needs to be decentralized. And basically, we need to own our own data. The way for freedom to happen is for data to be decentralized.
I own lucasmiles.org.
Good.
But somebody else had purchased before me, lucasmiles.com, and they want like $54,000 for this. So I have not purchased that from them yet. But but one of these days, maybe. But that's I think there's huge import, and I wish I would have gotten it sooner. So that's not the case, in that standpoint.
For sure.
So obviously, we have people using the major social platforms that are out there right now, things like Instagram, Twitter, or X, TikTok, etc., and getting messaging out there. But the concern is that those are still owned by somebody else, and
Right.
there's certain things you can't say, there's certain things you can't talk about, and they have the ability to, in theory, kind of turn on or turn off certain ideas or messages on how much they're going to allow that to kind of circulate among the masses or go viral. Whereas what you're advocating for is if people have their own platform and they kind of own that own domain space, you get to decide what you put there, assuming it's not, illegal or harming the public in some, way, nefarious way,
Right.
that, you can share those ideas, especially from a faith standpoint, which we're interested very much so here, without the same limitations, and then maybe use these other channels to help drive people to the space that you control.
Yeah. The only reason why we are able to be throttled and censored on social media is that the big tech companies own our data, essentially. And if you own your own data, then they lack a legal ability to censor you. And this is I think people don't understand how important that is going to be going forward.
What would you say to somebody out there that might be watching today? Obviously a lot of our viewers are Christians already, but I also don't want to take that for granted. And those Christians are going to be, they might be that pastor that we talked about, earlier, sure, who it has somebody such as yourself coming, to say, tell me why I should believe. Give us a little bit on the reasons to believe here.
I think the most important thing that shifted my perspective, which I simply didn't have before, was that the function of the traditional arguments for the existence of God, like the argument from contingency, the argument from causality, the argument from design, etc., is not to each individual argument does not establish by itself that God exists. And you're not going to be persuaded at all if you think that's how they work. That's not how they work. The important thing is to learn what function they have in the overall case for the existence of God. So Christian philosophers like to talk about a thing called the cumulative case for the existence of God. I think individually, none of the traditional arguments for the existence of God will do the trick. Yeah. They will not persuade you that Jesus is your Lord and Savior. No, guaranteed. They don't work that way. But when you put them all together and you build an argument to the best explanation, you can look it up, then you might just well discover that there's a lot more there than you realized. At least that's how it was for me.
It's interesting, as you're talking, I think about, Jesus talked about this idea that, he's going to tear down the temple and then rebuild it in 3 days. And, you gave this illustration earlier that you felt like, God was kind of taking these bricks one by one down of the wall that was separating you, from him. But I think that what you're saying in this cumulative, really reasoning for the Lord is simultaneously as he's pulling down those, he's also over here building a foundation in your life, brick by brick of all of these different proofs and arguments and reasons. And I think that we can all look back over our lives and see those moments where throughout our childhood or throughout our adolescence or throughout our young adulthood, where God was, where he was there, he was trying to move on our life, he was trying to get our attention. And at some point, ideally, you do have that cumulative sort of aspect where you go, this is I'm now, convinced that this is, the truth, that he is the way, the truth, and the life in that regard. So if people want to find out more about you, where can they go? Let's get all the info in there so they can keep up with your story here.
LarrySanger.org, or if you're interested in the drives, Encyclosphere, just like it sounds, like encyclopedia, but encyclosphere.org.
Awesome. So, Larry, very fascinating story, inspirational, and I think also bringing attention to a lot of things that probably people don't think about on a daily basis that I think as we, are people who are very passionate about freedom, liberty, protection from censorship, all of those things that definitely need to be thought about and the bell needs to be rang a little bit louder on. So thank you so much for coming on the show, and thank you to all of you for watching Strong Church. I'm your host, Lucas Miles, here at TPUSA Faith. Until next time, stay strong, stay bold.